colleagues, mammals, great apes. I hope you had a nice, refreshing lunch and coffee break. So I'm going to present here the contents of one of the chapters of the handbook that we are working. So once again, I would like to thank my friends and colleagues in the project, and particularly Gianfranco for having this idea. So the chapter me and my institution were dealing with, among the chapters, there was the ethics of eating, the impact of food, and local and global problems. So as the others already did, I'm going to give you an outline of the chapter. It will be composed of 4 paragraphs. Food is more than just eating. How to investigate on a product, ethical issues related to food, this one divided in 6 sub-paragraphs. Then conclusions, then of course there are references, the glossary entries, and the focus is on the ethical reasons of veganism. I'll later explain why. So let's go through the paragraphs. The first one, food is more than just eating. I'd like to ask if this is an intercultural issue. When we were kids and we didn't want to eat something, did you have your parents telling you that we should eat because there are people dying in Africa? Well, so it's international, right? Okay. So now
the reason why we're
yeah, exactly. We're out of. So I just use this this kind of memory as an excuse to introduce the fact that without knowing it and without wanting to mean anything particularly deep, our parents were addressing a very important connection. Maybe they didn't know that there was this connection, but there is a connection between what we eat and some ethical, ideological, political, social problem that could be in our territory, but it could also be far. So actually, yes, there is a connection, even though they didn't know that. Why? So eating and drinking are primary needs. The need for food requires a great deal of variety in order to be properly fulfilled, and a great deal of processes that go along with that variety. We have, production, transportation, packaging, there's plenty of things. Everywhere in the world, the food industry contributes to a significant chunk of a country's economy. So that's also a relevant issue. And as you may or may not know, more or less 10% of our money goes into buying food and drinks. So the food we choose to place or not to place on our table, the food we decide to eat or not to eat, is in many ways an ethical action. That is an action that may be right or wrong in moral terms, and not only for ourselves, but also for the society we live in. The act of choosing what we buy in accordance to values we believe in and social problems we care for is called critical consumerism. So the moment when we buy or don't buy something, not just because it's convenient or not convenient, healthy or not healthy for us, or tasty or not tasty, but because we think that this has an impact somewhere, somehow in the world, this is the moment we are acting as critical consumers. So the second paragraph, how to investigate on a product. So how do we understand what is the ethical and political contents of food? So I suggest 3 steps. The first step is to read the label. We take the moment when we go to the supermarket, we start reading what is there. And usually there are 3 important pieces of information that we may learn from there. So the ingredients, and from the contents of the ingredients, the type of ingredients, we can learn something. The producers, who they are, what they do, where they are connected, and so on. And finally, the characteristics of the product, maybe where it was produced, what kind of involvement in other processes are there. I'll just make some examples. A very fashionable problem nowadays is to try and avoid palm oil in products. So it's a big issue related to environment, but also related to problems in the developing countries. How do we know that there is palm oil? Usually in the ingredient we read palm oil or something that sounds like palm in the beginning. But do you have any idea how many products, possible ingredients contain palm oil? Here is a list. We are not going to read it because it's very big. 1, second page, third page, fourth page. So all these are ingredients that contain palm oil in one way or another, in one amount or another. Then the second example with this first step. Very often in packaging, there is some symbol that says something, particularly about the environmental impact, but also about other questions. Do we know how to read those labels? I was hoping to have more students. I would have made it a little bit like a game here, but I see that there are not so many. So we'll just make it as a kind of a general game. Who knows what this symbol means? Sorry? We have a bio, another. Do we know how it is called also?
Organic. Organic.
Organic. Bio, okay. The symbol is called Euroleaf.
Euroleaf.
Yeah. And it means that it is certified biological by European Union laws. So not somewhere else, but in a European. What about this? Oh, the name is already there, eco-label. It's called eco-label. So. Very good. Related with the environment, it means that it is it meets the European standards for low environmental impact in production and distribution. What about this?
No animals were killed.
Cruelty-free, no animals were killed. It's the famous leaping bunny, and it means that the product is certified cruelty-free, not involving animal abuse, such as experimentation, vivisection, etc. And these parameters are established by the European Coalition to End Animal Experimentation. Okay, this is an easy one. It's the vegan label. It means that the product is totally harmless to animals in any way. So not only that it does not contain animal ingredients, but it was also cruelty-free. So it's the content of the food plus the leaping bunny, basically, plus the cruelty-free thing. So that's why you can hear around also terms like vegan shoes, vegan cosmetics. Is not just that you can eat them as a vegan, but it's because they don't have any animal products and don't derive from any animal abuse. And of course there are many variants to this logo, so this is just one of them. It is written in many ways. Now we're getting interesting.
Recycle.
What exactly about recycling?
The company pays a tax, and then tax which helps recycle.
Okay, that's a correct answer for another label,
Yeah.
but good that you raised this thing because it will come later. Sorry?
Sustainable economy.
Well, yeah, in principle, that's the general concept, but it means simply that the packaging material can be recycled. For instance, the packaging is cardboard. This is one of my favorite because it's like one of the most overrated symbols. Do you know what it means?
Throw away.
Sorry?
Throw away.
Yeah, basically yes. It simply means, it invites the customers, look, don't throw this on the ground, just put it somewhere where it should be. So it's just, a kind of educational advice.
This is the one
Yeah.
I meant.
So this is Christian's previous suggestion. So it means that in those countries where the law exists, that the producer pays a particular tax to support recycling in its country. This is another one that we see more and more often. Anybody? Fair trade, very good. Do we know what fair trade means? I trust you. You're saying yes with your face. So it informs that the item was produced and distributed while providing fair contracts and dignified conditions to the workers, usually in developing countries, but not necessarily. And the certification, this is important for the next example, it's certified by the Fair Trade Labeling Organization, which is a non-governmental organization which appears to be very independent and not affected or influenced by corporations and so on. On the contrary, a sign that you see less often is this Rainforest Alliance certified. I noticed Liam, our American friend, who says he has seen that because that's quite common in American products indeed. So if you don't know what it is, I'll tell you. It informs generally or perhaps generically that the product is sustainable in a very general way, as by certification of the American organization Rainforest Alliance, which is a rather suspicious organization. There have been a lot of criticism for this label to be pretty vague, and it's probably no coincidence that the big corporations that we mostly associate to pollution and high environmental impact tend to use this particular label, so McDonald's, Nestlé, and others. Now the second step, so this was the first step, to read the packaging, what is written there. The second step is to collect information. We have at least, I suggest at least 3 ways to collect information. So number 1, we simply read. This is an example of an article talking about transparent companies. There are, magazines, online sources that we can read. We could visit the website of the very corporation we are buying the product of. Sometimes they include interesting material about their commitment to ethical questions. For instance, the company Whole Foods, whom you may have heard of, has subscribed, maybe you can see this is a DocuSign, so it's an electronic signature, electronically signed document, a disclosure statement about the UK Modern Slavery Act. So this contemporary work, abuse and exploitation. And so the company declares to be not to be involved in any form of modern slavery treatment of their workers, and they publish the whole document, which is available on their website. So this is another way we can collect information. We can just go to the very website of. You can be sure that if they have something to be proud of, they will show it off, because obviously they want to promote themselves as a good companies with a good heart. Or there are also NGOs that are particularly involved in consumerism and so on, that will give you additional information. This is a snapshot from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals NGO, which gives you a list of the companies that make animal experimentation or use animal products and so on. So you can browse to that and collect information like that. Third step, weirdly enough, you can ask. You can ask them, the companies, you can write to them. This information for millennials, this is a telephone. There are also social media. You can just ask them to, if you have, if you don't know exactly, for instance, in your label I couldn't see where this very product was produced. Could you tell me? Now you have 3 options. They don't answer, from which you can already infer that this is not a very transparent company. Or if they answer, they can tell a lie or the truth. And so you can discern whether they are liars or whether they are pretty transparent. And from what I read, particularly from the Wuppertal Institute, which is a particularly active center concerning environmental impact, but also workers' rights and so on. Surprisingly enough, the companies are quite eager to answer, even when they have a negative answer to give, an answer that expectedly is negative. So this is another thing you can do. Now, the third paragraph of the chapter is ethical issues related to food. And there, as you may remember, there are 6 sub-paragraphs, so we briefly go through them. Number 1, first sub-paragraph, the respect for consumers. So one way to understand if the food you are buying has an ethical virtue, an ethical value, is how much they respect the consumers. So that is again achieved by the clarity of the label, for instance. If you have all the information you need, it means that the company is respecting you. The more they are hiding, the less they are respecting you, just like people. You know, the less they tell you, the less they are respecting you. Again, you can visit the direct sources. This is an example from the Subway website, where you can see that there is, for instance, there is a section called responsibility, where they talk about their involvement in ethical issues, etc. The second subparagraph is power and influence. And here I use a very, unfortunately very small, because there's a lot of information. These are like the big corporations that control most of the market of daily products, not just food. You can see also washing powders, cosmetics, and the likes. So obviously corporations like this are very powerful to begin with, but power is also measured in other ways, and we have to distinguish between hard power and soft power. The hard power is the power that is connected mostly to political and military action. So for instance, you may have a company that is supplying food to a dictatorial regime and is heavily involved in that, or that they have also one business in the food, but another business is in building weapons and sold in civil wars, etc., etc. So these are examples of hard power. Soft power is the amount of power that you have on the media, on influencing people without direct violent action. So if you see that the property of the company not only has food and so on, but also owns some newspapers, or has chairs in important committees like the Food and Agriculture Organization, etc., etc. You see that they have a lot of soft power as well. Later I will make an example. Number 3, the workforce. So how much do we know about the product in relation to the actual people who produced or transported or packaged the product? So some examples: work safety. We know that there have been lawsuits against certain companies that were providing unsafe conditions to the workers. Or the already mentioned modern slavery, the fact that I have a very, very dear friend who is working in IKEA, and he said that since the property has changed, IKEA, who used to have a great image of this very liberal and open and workers inclined, employee inclined policy, now they have changed completely, and the conditions of the workers has worsened a lot. So these are all things that we may want to investigate in relation to workforce. Number 4 was developing countries, and for instance, if the company is using child labor somewhere in some developing country, if the conditions of the workers are fair or not fair, if the company has brought away from local citizens big chunks of land, leaving them homeless, etc. There are many issues also related with developing countries. Number 5, the topic of the day, it's the environment. Now we are talking about climate change, environmental impact, footprint, pollution, and so on. So I put a few more examples of the relation between food and environmental impact. So one is transportation. As we may or may not know, transportation by airplanes of products is far more polluting than any other mean of transportation. You can see the figures here. So in the end, a ship transportation seems to be the less impactful form of transportation, unless of course the ship broke and all the oil is spread over the sea. But and of course train is pretty ecological as well. Or another example is the amount of, this is quite interesting, the energy consumption between industrial production and biological production can have differences in the impact. So, for instance, potatoes between industrial and biological production is actually the same. There's no big difference if you buy industrially made potatoes or organically made potatoes. So to buy a biological potato doesn't make a huge difference in terms of environmental impact. Then of course the potato itself may be better, healthier, and so on. But if we switch to cabbage, for instance, the biological cabbage is much less impactful on the environment than the industrial one. So it really shifts from depending on the product. Unfortunately, this is in Italian. It's the only one I could find. Another example is where does the energy go? And another of the fashionable topic. I have to say I hate the use of the word fashion of climate change, fashion of veganism, because it reduces to a mere lifestyle choice. I want red shoes instead of black shoes. No, it's just that simply these topics are being brought forward in society, and there is an alarm, there is an emergency, and yes, there is a fashion part in it because more and more people are joining that, but it's also because of the more availability of information. So one of the so-called fashionable topic is this 0 kilometer. You may have heard, like these products that are very local. And again, some people are accused of just following a fashion, but as you can see, almost half of the energy consumed in a food product goes in the transportation. So, to switch as much as possible to local means to affect this slice of the pie, which is more important than the agricultural production or the industrial transformation or the distribution. So this is again something we may want to think about. Finally, another important thing where I'm particularly irritated, I have to say, against the policy of distribution and packaging of biological products. Probably you have the same experience also in your own countries. Very often the biological product, which is supposed to be environmentally sound, is packaged much more than the industrial products. Like you have the single eggplant, biological eggplant in the plastic bag, in the condom, like as I call it. So the thing is, again, sorry for the Italian statistic, but the thing is that almost 40% of our waste, of our domestic garbage, comes from packaging. Packaging is one of the worst problems for the economy, for the ecology. So again, there was recently on Facebook there was this challenge: try to go to the supermarket and buy completely without plastic. I tried to do it, and the only solution was to eat in a restaurant. It was impossible unless I would have renounced the majority of the things I wanted to buy, but that's the challenge. You go and buy what you need to buy and you avoid plastic. It wasn't possible to my local supermarket. So that's another important question in terms of ecological impact. And finally, for this paragraph, the animals. We will talk again in a few minutes when we'll talk about the focus. But among the many things is exactly the cruelty-free aspect, whether or not there are animal products, the question of intensive farming, etc., etc. So how much the food as an animal friendly or animal hostile treatment in one way or another. Later I will give you more examples in relation to that. And then the conclusions in the chapter are actually very short, but I use this opportunity to make more of a summary of the situation. If we want to put together all these parameters for evaluating the ethical values of a product, for instance, an example that we may all expect is Coca-Cola. An investigation on Coca-Cola will tell us that Coca-Cola usually provides, when it comes to respect for consumers, usually provides data about sales and budget and about environmental impact, but tends to conceal info about the property, the structure of the corporation, and does not report or admit its fines, lawsuits, etc. So they've been involved, of course, in years in many lawsuits against various parties, but they don't declare that in any transparent way. Workforce, we'll talk in the developing countries part. So hard power and soft power. Hard power, Coca-Cola has a millionaire deal with the US Army. It has branches in many oppressive regimes, so it doesn't boycott dictatorial regimes, and has branches in many tax havens. That's another important thing. Soft power, it has, of course, it's huge, perhaps the hugest soft power of most of the companies in the world. It has representatives in countless boards and committees, including those related to health and safety. It's a bit of ironic that committees about food health and food safety has a Coca-Cola representative in it. I can't imagine what happens in the meeting if the guy says, well, no, actually Coca-Cola is pretty good. And regularly gives money to political parties, which is also important, which means that later, if the politician enters the parliament, he will probably advance bills in support of Coca-Cola. No particular fault about animals. Developing countries, it is involved in numerous cases of misconduct over local workers. So bad salaries, bad work safety, threats to workers, basically the modern slavery deal. And finally, environment. Its productive processes are particularly polluting, and it was involved in numerous cases of environmental abuse. So a sort of kind of profile, ethical profile of a company, resulting from all the sources that I was mentioning before.
And also it tastes bad.
Yeah, according to some people. I've always been for Cucota, that's an inside joke for Italians. Another thing that we can use for conclusions is, since we are dealing with schools that are in the food industry, so how we can, some simple actions that we can do, either as consumers or as sellers, caterers, basically what you're studying in your schools, and some examples. So, for instance, as consumers we can reduce unhealthy products. As sellers, caterers, we can sell less unhealthy products. For example, in a restaurant you can limit the options for lemonades. Examples are just very simple and very random, nothing in particular. As consumers, we can buy more unpackaged products and particularly avoid single-dose ones. That's something that has a high impact. So as sellers, caterers, we can buy more unpackaged products from distributors and avoid single-dose ones. For instance, we can serve sugar in a sugar bowl instead of giving this one-dose sugar as we have here, for instance. And I know it's very difficult, having organized myself some congresses, but one can always try. Number 3, when not possible, choose light packaging, for instance, paper instead of plastic. As sellers, caterers, you can choose to package the takeaway and the catering with more ecological materials. For instance, you can serve glass water bottles instead of plastic bottles. Another little piece of advice, cook more, which means avoid buying too many pre-made products. The same, as sellers, caterers, you can cook more. For instance, a lot of restaurants or pizzerias and so on, they buy this pre-cut cheese to spread over the pizza. So that's a separate package, a separate product, and so on. We can just grate those who use the formaggio filante instead of mozzarella, or you can just cut the mozzarella and so on. We can prepare more at home, and we can prepare more as sellers, cutters, we can prepare more on the place. So that means reducing the outsourcing, which means reducing transportation, etc., etc. And again, paying attention to labels, and paying attention to labels as well for sellers, caterers. So, in the remaining time, some words about the focus. If I'm allowed. What's happening? Oh, right. So the focus is on the ethical reasons of veganism, and I chose this not only because it's a field of expertise for me, but also because it's an example that actually gather a lot of the previously mentioned criteria for evaluating the ethical value of food. So, number one, obviously the animal questions. So, a reason to go vegan is, actually there are two types. There is the animal welfare approach, which means reducing, not fighting, but reducing the pain or the abuse of animals and improving the conditions, or the animal rights and or animal liberation approach, which goes for the total, to put a total stop to animal abuse and production. So some data you may be interested in learning. Every year we slaughter from 150 to 170 billion of animals just for the meat, which makes about 20 millions per hour, about 320,000 per minute, and well over 5,000 per second. So just imagine, every second 5,000 animals are killed for meat. So whichever way we look at this issue, this figure is shocking. It exceeds any reasonable discussion on moderation, fair amount of killing, personal freedom, natural law, etc. So of course everybody has different points of view on this issue, but I just wanted to make a point on people accusing vegans not to be moderate people, to be extremists. To me, 5,000 animals killed per second is very extremist. So usually a person who wants to moderate that amount. If you're interested, sorry, it came bad color, but there is actually a kill counter that gives you a graphic idea of this data. You can find it on the internet. And then an additional problem with these figures, which are based, by the way, on the Food and Agriculture Organization data, not PETA, not Vegan Society, but it's a kind of a world institutional source, is that they do not count the animals that die in the process. So these are the animals that are killed and end up in our dish. But in the process, there are plenty of other animals killed. Classic examples, when in the egg industry, whenever chicks are born, only the females are saved and all the males get killed, get basically minced. So these are all how to call it, side effects of the meat and dairy industry. So there are no official data on this side effects, but estimations are in the order of hundreds of millions per year. That aside, finally, one should take into account the existence of these animals, their living conditions, the way they are fed, automatized, confined, exploited. So that's, again, the difference between animal welfare or animal liberation. Now, the second important ethical issue raised by veganism is concerning the developing countries and, together with that, also the workers' condition. So one of the things that you hear more often, if you are vegan or if you are dealing with a vegan, is this human beings first. So why do you care about animals, human beings, the human animals should come first, and this should be the priority. So you care about animals while there are millions of people dying, etc., etc. So does veganism have any impact also on the human animal? Well, the answer is yes, actually, and probably more than we expect. Because choosing a vegan lifestyle has a strong impact on strictly human problems, in particular poverty and famine. The meat industry indeed is based on and encourages unfair use and distribution of their resources, making poor people poorer and hungry people more hungry. How does that happen? Let's see. Again, referring to the nice presentation we had on the beverages this morning, you may remember there were these very nice maps about the beer, the wine, and so on. You may have noticed that, particularly the beer, as far as I remember, the beer map was very generally distributed, and you had some African countries where the high consumption of beer. So the beer consumption is not related to the economic, financial conditions of these countries. While you can see clearly that in the case of meat, this is very much the point. More industrialized, so-called developed countries have higher consumption of meat as opposed to the developing countries who have less. And you may or may not know, again, that the pro-meat sources, so those that say that meat must be eaten for health, fitness reasons and so on, say that the reasonable consumption of meat should be about 25 to 30 kilos per person every year. That means we should be somewhere in these colors. While, as you can see, the so-called Western world highly exceeds this and touches this area of consumption. Specifically about the 3 countries of this project. So, Bulgaria is a little more than Japan and far less than UK, but still over. So I think Bulgarians, like Lithuanians, like to think of themselves as a poor country. But when it comes to meat consumption, we are higher than the recommended amount. Lithuania is pretty active on the activity as well, so it fares 78 kilos per capita, so almost like UK. And Italy has 89 kilos, exceeding UK, but still not competing with France. I always have a joke with my son. My son sometimes asks me, Papa, will the world become vegetarian one day? And I always say yes, but France will be the last one to surrender. Because every time I go to France, it's totally impossible to be vegan and very, very difficult even to just be vegetarian. Okay, so of course, you know, countries like USA have the highest consumption of meat in absolute. What else about developing countries? The fact that if you know probably that the counting of nutritional values goes by protein. So if you want to have an equivalent of the nutrients of each food, you have to count the proteins. So counting the protein, it is interesting to know that if you cultivate the same amount of land by growing vegetable proteins like soybean, or if you raise cattle in that same amount of land, with the soybean you can feed 3,320 people, and with the meat you only feed 180 people. Or in other words, in the same amount of land you can cultivate 60 kilograms of grain or only 1 kilogram of beef, so that feeds 20 people as compared to 2. In USA, for instance, 70% of grain and cereal grown in America are fed to farmed animals. Another stereotype, commonplace that the poor vegans get from meat eaters is like, aren't you sorry for the plants? You know, but plants have feelings too. Don't pretend like you never said this because you did. So in actual fact, being vegan has a lower impact on killing the poor sentimental plants, because most of the plants that are cultivated in the world actually go to feed the animals that eventually are killed for the meat. Now, another very large, very wide topic where veganism has an impact is environment. So of course there is a very fine line between what is good for us and what is good for the planet, and probably there is no line at all, but trying to be more specific, the meat industry has one of the heaviest impacts on the environment and by consequence on us. And it has been calculated that at the moment the meat industry is the #1 factor for climate change, even exceeding airplane transportation. So the main problems related with environment and veganism are land waste, energy waste, pollution, global warming and water waste. How, again? For instance, the amount of land we have seen of food So 30 square meters for beef, a bit more than 20 for pork, chicken, eggs, and this is what you need for 1 kilo of fruits or potatoes or vegetables. Again, some more data. So for instance, raising animals for food uses 30% of the earth land mass. So just almost 1/3 of the land is used for cattle. There are more data that you can take a look at. Another point is pollution. So 1 pound, which is 450 kilo, which is the average weight of a steak, when produced, uses as much fuel as driving a car for 32 miles. 1 mile is 1.6 kilometers. Energy consumption. This is how much energy is needed for producing this combination of cereals and vegetables, and this is the amount of energy for beef steak. Global warming, this is the amount of gas, toxic gas emitted by the animal industry as compared to, for instance, car consumption. Some more. Chickens, turkeys, pigs, and cows are collectively the largest producer of methane in the United States. Methane is 20 times more powerful at trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So again, climate change, our friend Greta. Water is also quite an issue. Again, this data come mostly from USA, which is the best monitored country in that respect. But nearly half of the water, of all the water used in the United States, goes to raising animals for food. So again, a difference between the water used for meat and the water used for wheat, for instance. Or, in other words, if you don't eat a steak, you can take the equivalent of water of showering for 6 months, which is good for personal hygiene, I guess. Okay, so this will be the last thing. Just to conclude, because we are in an environment where we are all using hotel rooms, and usually in the hotel room, including Corral where I'm staying, there is always this message of not wasting the towels, because that helps the environment. And I have this dream that I will start writing answers to the hotel owners. So this is an example that we have in Kaunas. Dear guest, everybody can join to environment protection. Frequent usage of chemical means, such as frequent towels, washing, etc., causes negative effects for environment. If you leave a used towel on the bathroom floor, we will change it. If you leave it hung up, we will know that you will use it more. Help us protect the environment. This is the answer I dream of writing. Dear hotel director, I was very happy to read that your hotel cares for environment. I will certainly follow your advice about towels. While we are at it, and since your commitment looks sincere to me, may I just suggest a much more effective way to protect the environment? Remove meat from your menu. This way your action will be literally 1,000 times more ecological. For instance, if you do 1 cycle of laundry in an average domestic machine, you will have wasted an average of 50 to 100 liters of water. But when you serve a single beef steak to your customer, please keep in mind that the production of that steak wasted more than 9,000 liters of water. Help me protect the environment. Thank you very much.